The white officer who helped send her father to jail had been dead 3 days when Ruth Monroe learned he had left her his house. She almost hung up. Then the lawyer on the other end of the line said, very quietly, "Mrs. Monroe, before you refuse it, Mr. Turner asked me to tell you one thing." Ruth stood still in her Atlanta kitchen with one hand flat on the counter. "What thing?" "Your father's real police report is behind the basement wall." For 38 years, Ruth Monroe had believed she knew what happened to her father. She knew the mile of county road where he was arrested and the name of the deputy who put him in handcuffs. She knew he came home 11 months later carrying his belongings in a brown paper sack, thinner and quieter than the man who had left. She knew that another man eventually confessed to the robbery. And she knew that Deputy Caleb Turner had spent the rest of his career saying the arrest had been reasonable based on what officers knew at the time. That was the phrase people used when they wanted the past to stop asking questions. She had heard it at 16. She had heard it in law school. She had heard it standing over her father's grave. Now she was 54 years old, barefoot on a Tuesday morning in October, and she was hearing something she had never heard before. There had been another report. "Who are you?" "Edwin Shaw. I represented Mr. Turner for the last 9 years of his life. I'm administering the estate. Caleb Turner had no business putting my name in his will." "I understand." "No, Mr. Shaw, you don't." There was no anger in her voice yet. Anger would have been easier. What she felt was older than anger, and had lived in her so long it had become part of the architecture. Outside her window, a delivery truck rolled past. 2 houses down, a leaf blower started up. 38 years, and the world still had the nerve to look ordinary. What exactly did he leave me? The Turner house on Waverly Road. The house, the land, and everything in it. Ruth laughed once. There was nothing amused in it. "I don't want his house." He believed you'd say that. Then, for once in his life, Caleb Turner understood something quickly. "He also instructed me not to pressure you." A pause. "But he asked that you inspect the property before you disclaim." "I've decided. Mrs. Monroe, there is a sealed room in the basement." Her fingers tightened on the counter's edge. "What's in it?" 36 boxes. He said you'd understand when you saw your father's name." Ruth looked at nothing for a long moment. "Send me the address." The address was unnecessary. Everybody who grew up in Bellwether County knew the Turner house. 5 miles north of town, under 2 enormous oaks, white brick, black shutters, a porch that ran the whole front. Sheriff William Turner had raised his son there and been the most powerful elected man in the county for 22 years. In Bellwether, children learned 3 things early: the high school football schedule, which church their grandmother expected them at on Easter, and the name Turner. Ruth had not been back in 8 years, not since they buried her father. By 2 that afternoon, she was on I-75 heading south. She told no one, not her law partner, not her brother James, and above all, not her mother. Nadine Monroe was 80 years old, living in a retirement apartment outside Savannah, and had already survived her husband's arrest, 11 months of not knowing, a bankruptcy, the loss of a house, and 30 years of watching Isaiah pretend certain things had stopped hurting. She had earned the right not to be dragged backward without warning. Ruth told herself she was only going to look, see the report, photograph it, leave the house exactly as she found it. That was the plan. On the night her father was arrested, Ruth Monroe was 16 and worried about whether Kevin Parker would ask her to homecoming. That embarrassed her for years afterward. She had believed grief should announce itself, some heaviness in the air, some warning. But the worst nights usually begin inside ordinary concerns. She was at the kitchen table with an algebra worksheet when her father came through the back door at 6:23 on Wednesday, September 21st. Isaiah Monroe was 44. 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, hands permanently roughened by wire and conduit, and the 1,000 small injuries of a man who had worked with tools since he was 14. He owned Monroe Electrical Service. Owned. was generous. The bank owned the truck. The supplier owned half the equipment. The mortgage company owned most of the house. But Monroe Electrical Service was painted in blue letters on the side of a tan Ford pickup, and every morning Isaiah put on a clean work shirt and went out as though the future belonged to him. That night he smelled like dust and hot insulation. Nadine was at the stove. "You're late." First Baptist. Half the lights in the education wing decided the Lord wanted darkness. "Did you correct the Lord?" "I made a respectful suggestion." Ruth rolled her eyes. Her father put a hand over his heart. "My own child. 16 years of sacrifice. You get dinner. I was hoping for admiration." Try James. James admires nobody. Her brother was 12 and outside, attempting to repair a bicycle with a wrench too large for every bolt on it. Isaiah passed behind Ruth, glanced at the worksheet, and tapped problem 14. "That one's wrong. You didn't even read it. Don't need to. A bad answer hums different. You hate algebra. I hate a lot of things. I still recognize them." She swatted at his hand. He laughed. That sound stayed with Ruth longer than almost anything else from the old house. Not the arrest, not the courtroom, not even the night he came home. Her father laughing in the kitchen in the last 30 minutes of their old life. At 7, he remembered he'd left his invoice book at the church. "Get it in the morning," Nadine said. "I need to bill 3 jobs tonight. You need to sit down. I'll sit down when people stop owing me money." He kissed her cheek, then looked at Ruth. "Want to ride?" "No. Your loss. Kevin might call." Isaiah paused at the door. "Kevin." Ruth immediately regretted speaking. "Daddy." "Parker? Boy with the red Chevrolet? Please leave. That truck leaks oil. You have never spoken to him. Don't need to. His truck speaks for him." Nadine started laughing at the stove. Ruth put both hands over her face. 20 minutes, Isaiah said. At 7:42 p.m., a clerk at Dunbar's Grocery on Highway 17 called the Bellwether County Sheriff's Department to report a robbery. The man who ran from the store wore a gray work jacket and drove off in what the clerk called a brown or tan pickup. The clerk was frightened. It had happened fast. The lot was poorly lit. He could not give a plate. He thought the driver was a black man. At 7:49, Deputy Caleb Turner heard the call. Caleb was 41 and had been a deputy for 13 years. He knew the county better than most people knew their own houses, which roads flooded in spring, which families feuded across generations, which teenagers would run if a patrol car slowed beside them. He also knew his father was 3 months from an election, and that Bellwether had gone 17 months without a serious robbery. By 8 o'clock, Sheriff William Turner had called dispatch twice. "Find that truck." Caleb found one at 8:06. Tan Ford. Black male driver. Gray work jacket. 2 miles from First Baptist. Isaiah saw the blue light in his mirror and sighed. He pulled onto the shoulder. He did not know why. "Evening. Evening, deputy. License." Caleb read it under the flashlight. "Isaiah Monroe." "Yes, sir." "Where are you coming from?" "First Baptist." "Doing what?" "Electrical work." "At 8 o'clock at night?" "I left my invoice book." The flashlight swung across the passenger seat. The invoice book was there. So were wire cutters, tape, gloves, a coil of copper, 2 screwdrivers. "Step out." "For what?" "Step out of the truck, Mr. Monroe." Isaiah heard the change in the man's voice. Men like Isaiah learned to hear such changes early. He put both hands where they could be seen. "My registration is in the glove box. I didn't ask for it. I'm telling you before I reach." A second patrol car arrived, then a third. By 8:11, Isaiah was standing beside his truck while 2 deputies leaned through the open windows. "What is this about?" "There was a robbery. Dunbar's." "I haven't been near Dunbar's." "Where were you at 7:45? "First Baptist." "You said that already." Because that's where I was. Anybody see you? Reverend Daniels. Mrs. Crawford. Harold Bell. Maybe 3 others. Wednesday choir let out late. Caleb wrote the names down. Isaiah glanced at the other deputies. You can call the church. We will. My worksheet's in the truck. Church office signed it. What time? 6:17. That doesn't help you at 7:45. I went back for the book. Anybody see you go back? I told you. Daniels was still there. The radio crackled. Dispatch relayed more from the clerk. Gray jacket, tan truck, black male, approximately 6 feet. Caleb looked at Isaiah. Isaiah looked back. You think that's me? I think we're investigating. Then, investigate. Caleb's mouth tightened. It was not what the man said. It was how evenly he said it. Caleb would think about that for the rest of his life. At the time, he experienced the calm as resistance. Turn around. You haven't called the church. We'll handle it. Call them first. Turn around. Deputy, you have my license. My business name is painted on the door. My tools are on the seat. I told you where I was. Turn around. Isaiah looked at the nameplate. Turner. Everybody in Bellwether knew what that meant. Your father's the sheriff. That has nothing to do with this. Isaiah looked at him a moment longer. Then he turned around. No one shouted. No one fought. No weapon appeared. Nobody was injured. It was a quiet decision on the side of a county road, and quiet decisions can take a family apart as completely as loud ones. At 8:34, a car pulled into the Monroe driveway. Ruth ran to the window, expecting her father. It was Reverend Samuel Daniels, and he took his hat off before he spoke. That was how she knew. Where's Isaiah? Daniels looked at Ruth, then back at Nadine. The sheriff's department took him in. Why? There was a robbery. What does that have to do with Isaiah? They stopped his truck. He was at your church. I know. You told them? I'm trying. Daniels looked ashamed. I called the station. Dispatcher said somebody would get back to me. Nadine picked up her purse. Ruth stood. I'm coming. Stay with your brother. I'm coming. Nadine started to argue, then looked at her daughter's face and stopped. 20 minutes later, Ruth stood under fluorescent lights in the Bellwether County Sheriff's office and watched her father through a narrow window in a door. He sat on a wooden bench. His hands were no longer cuffed, which somehow made it worse. Isaiah looked up. He saw her, and his expression changed. Not to fear, to embarrassment. Her father was embarrassed that his daughter had to see him there. Ruth never forgot that. Reverend Daniels went to the booking desk. Deputy Turner. I know who you are, Reverend. Isaiah Monroe was at my church tonight. What time? He came back just after 7:30. How sure are you? Completely. You check a clock? I was locking the office. The Braves game had just come on the radio in my car. He scared me half to death coming through the side door. Caleb stopped writing. What time exactly? 7:35. 7:37. The robbery had come in at 7:42. Dunbar's was 9 miles from First Baptist on wet 2-lane road. Caleb knew that. He also knew something else. At 8:27, before the family arrived, Mrs. Eleanor Crawford had called dispatch. She remembered Isaiah's truck because he'd parked under the security light and asked whether she needed help carrying hymnals. At 8:31, Harold Bell called and said the same thing. 3 witnesses. Caleb had already begun his incident report. The first handwritten draft carried a sentence near the bottom of page 1. Alibi appears credible. Recommend immediate verification before continued detention. He wrote it because it was true. Then his father walked in and shut the office door. Sheriff William Turner was 67, silver-haired, heavy through the chest, with a voice that could quiet a room without rising. What have you got? Caleb explained. William listened, then looked through the glass at the man on the bench. That him? Yes. Clerk identify him? Not yet. Truck matches. Roughly. Jacket. Height. Yes. Yes. William picked up the report and tapped the line about the alibi. What's this? 3 people put him at the church. When? Within 5 or 6 minutes of the robbery. You drive it? Not yet. Then you don't know. It's 9 miles, Dad. At the station, Caleb almost never called him that. William noticed. What? We may have the wrong man. We may have a suspect lying. Reverend Daniels called. Preachers can be mistaken. Mrs. Crawford called. People protect people they know. Harold Bell. William's expression changed. Not much. Enough. He sat down across from his son. Listen to me. We've got a frightened clerk who says a black man in a tan truck robbed his store. 14 minutes later, you stop a black man in a tan truck in the right jacket, coming from the opposite direction. According to him. According to 3 witnesses. William leaned back. You release him tonight, and that clerk picks him out of a book tomorrow. Every voter in this county hears we had the man and turned him loose. This isn't about the election. His father's eyes went cold. I didn't say it was. Caleb looked down at the report. William followed his eyes. You want to be careful with language like that before you've verified it. Like what? Credible. It is credible. It's unverified. He slid the paper back across the desk. Type it clean. Write what you know, not what you feel. I don't feel anything. Then it shouldn't be difficult. For the rest of his life, Caleb Turner remembered the next 30 seconds with painful clarity. The hum of the fluorescent tube, the coffee stain on his father's cuff, a mosquito tapping the inside of the window, and his own hand reaching for the paper. He could have said no. People imagine moral failure as something dramatic, a bribe under a table, a threat, a shouted order. Sometimes it is only a man picking up a piece of paper. Caleb picked it up. He retyped the report. The sentence disappeared. At 9:26, he walked into the holding area. Isaiah stood. Did you call the church? Yes. And? Caleb paused. The pause told Isaiah everything. You know I was there. We're still verifying. Do your procedures change distance? Caleb said nothing. I was 9 miles away. We'll sort it out. When? Tomorrow. No. No what? No, you don't get to say. No. Tomorrow. Like tomorrow belongs to you. Isaiah stepped closer to the bars. My wife is outside. My children are outside. You have people telling you where I was. I said we're verifying. Isaiah studied him for a long moment. Then he asked the question Caleb Turner would hear in his own head for 38 years. If this were your father, would this evidence be enough? Caleb did not answer. Isaiah nodded slowly. That's what I thought. The next morning, the clerk looked at 6 photographs and hesitated between Isaiah and another man. The investigator wrote, Tentative identification. By noon, the word. Tentative. Had left the conversation. The public defender assigned to Isaiah was named Wendell Pate. He was 31 and carried 63 open files. He came to the jail on the 4th day with a legal pad and a cold cup of coffee and did not sit down. They'll take a plea to theft by taking. Time served plus probation. You'd walk out inside a month. I wasn't there. Mr. Monroe, 3 people saw me at the church. 3 people from your congregation, and the state will say so. They'll say the times are estimates. They'll say a man's friends round the clock in his favor. Pate finally sat. I believe you. I want you to hear that. I also want you to hear that I have 62 other people who believe I'm going to be in 2 places tomorrow morning. Then drive the road, Isaiah said. 9 miles. Time it. Pate wrote it on the pad. He meant to. He got to it 11 weeks later. Assistant District Attorney Lynn Aldridge was 39 and not a cruel woman. At the preliminary hearing, she laid it out the way it looked on her desk. A clerk's identification, a matching vehicle, a matching garment, a matching physical description, and an alibi supplied entirely by people who knew the defendant by name. She never said the word. Race. She never had to. The machine did that part quietly, without being asked. The judge bound the case over. Bond was set at $15,000. Nadine tried. She borrowed from her sister. She called Isaiah's brother in Ohio. She went to the bank, and the bank asked her about the business loan. Within 6 weeks, Monroe Electrical had lost 2 commercial contracts. People did not say Isaiah was guilty. They said they were uncomfortable. They said they needed certainty. They said maybe after things were cleared up. Maybe is a word that can bankrupt a family. Trial was continued twice. Ruth visited every Sunday. At first, her father asked about home, then about school, then about James, then, more and more, about bills. Is your mother sleeping? She says she is. She isn't. I know. Don't let her sell the truck. Daddy. She sells the truck. The business is finished. The business is all ready. Ruth stopped. Isaiah looked at her through the glass. Already what? Nothing. He knew. By Christmas, Nadine sold the truck. Isaiah did not speak for nearly 5 minutes during Ruth's next visit. Finally, he said, "Did they take my lettering off?" Something cracked in her. What? The truck. I don't know. He nodded. I painted that lettering myself. Ruth pressed a hand to the glass. Daddy, you're coming home. Yes, you are. I know. But his eyes had gone somewhere else. 11 months after the arrest, a 26-year-old named Franklin Wills was picked up in another county after a string of small store robberies. He confessed to Dunbar's. He knew where the clerk had been standing, how much was taken, and what he'd dropped behind the dumpster on his way out. He drove a faded brown pickup. The charges against Isaiah Monroe were dismissed. No trial, no conviction, no apology. The county issued a 1-paragraph statement saying new evidence had emerged. Isaiah came home on a Thursday afternoon in August of 1989. Ruth expected a crowd. 7 people came. He stepped out of a borrowed car holding a brown paper sack with the clothes he'd been arrested in. Ruth started toward him and stopped. He looked smaller, not physically. Something had been taken out of his posture. He opened his arms and she went into them. He smelled like soap and paper. She cried. He did not. Nadine stood on the porch. Isaiah walked to his wife slowly. 11 months had settled into both of their faces. I'm sorry. You're sorry? I'm sorry you had to. She struck the flat of her hand against his chest. Don't you apologize to me for what they did. Then she put both arms around him. That night, Ruth found her father at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with the contents of the paper sack laid out in front of him. Wallet, belt, work watch, wedding ring, 3 receipts, a folded business card. Nothing worth anything. He was looking at the ring. You okay? No. It was the first time Ruth had ever heard her father answer that question honestly. She sat down across from him. They cleared you. No, baby. What do you mean? They stopped accusing me. That's the same thing. No. At 16, she did not understand. Years later, she would. Clearing a person and restoring a person are not the same work. The Monroes never fully recovered. They sold the house the following spring. Isaiah reopened from a rented garage on Pryor Street, but some customers never came back. Nadine took extra shifts at the nursing home. Ruth shelved books at the county library. James quit baseball because of the travel fees. Nobody starved. Nobody became homeless. Nobody's life ended. That made it difficult to explain to people who wanted harm to arrive in obvious shapes. The damage was quieter than that. A college account emptied, a house sold, a marriage shortened at the edges. A man who checked his mirror every time a patrol car appeared behind him. A 16-year-old girl who stopped assuming that adults in uniforms knew what they were doing. Ruth went to college, then law school. People told Isaiah how proud he must be, and he was, and he also knew exactly why she'd gone. When she was 29, she won her first wrongful conviction appeal and drove 3 hours to tell him in person. He was up a ladder in Nadine's kitchen, replacing a ceiling fan. "You won?" "We won." He came down. "Man coming home?" "Next week." Isaiah nodded. He did not smile. "What?" "Nothing." "Daddy." He sat down at the table. "You remember Caleb Turner?" The name still had power. "Yes." "You ever see him?" "Not in years." "Good. I thought you'd want me to." "No." "Why?" "Because I'm not letting that man live in your house without paying rent." He tapped his chest. "In here. You lost 11 months. I know exactly what I lost." He knew something was wrong. I think he did. "Then why shouldn't I?" "Because a fault doesn't get cleared by the man who explains it best." Isaiah turned the screwdriver over in his hand. "You can chase a bad circuit up and down a wall your whole life. Sooner or later you go to the panel. He isn't the panel, baby. He's one bad splice." Ruth went quiet. "Help people," he said. "Don't spend your life trying to make one old deputy admit a thing you already know." She listened. Mostly. Caleb Turner's career went on. He made sergeant, then lieutenant. He never made sheriff. After William retired, the county elected somebody else, and Caleb stayed. Over time, his reputation changed. Younger deputies called him careful. He discouraged unnecessary searches. He required written explanations when an identification was rejected. He once suspended a deputy for making jokes about a motorist's accent. People in Bellwether began calling him fair. Ruth heard these things from a distance and was not impressed. A man could become careful after driving through somebody else's life like weather. Carefulness did not rebuild the house or repaint the lettering or return Christmas of 1988. Caleb never called, never came to the door, never wrote. Not while Isaiah was alive, or so Ruth believed. Isaiah Monroe died in 2018 at 74. Heart failure. He went quickly. Ruth was with him. Near the end, when breathing had become work, he asked her to open the blinds. Late sun came across the bed. "You still angry?" She knew exactly what he meant. "Yes. You always were." "You made me that way." "No." He closed his eyes a moment. "They gave you the reasons. You picked what to build with them." She held his hand. "I became a lawyer. I noticed. You're impossible." "I'm dying. It comes with privileges." She laughed through tears. He squeezed her fingers. "Promise me something. When I'm gone, don't make my worst year the title of my whole life." Ruth looked away. He waited. Finally, she nodded. "Promise." He died 2 days later. For 8 years, she kept it. Then Caleb Turner died and left her his house. By 4:30 that October afternoon, Ruth turned onto Waverly Road. The Turner house appeared behind the oaks exactly as she remembered it. Smaller. Old houses do that. They shrink once the people inside them lose power. Edwin Shaw was waiting on the porch. Thin, gray, in a summer-weight suit, holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Monroe." "Mr. Shaw." She looked at his offered hand, then shook it. "You have 10 minutes. I suspect I'll need fewer." Inside, it smelled like furniture polish, old paper, and air conditioning set too cold. Caleb had lived alone. His wife Margaret had died 12 years earlier, and there were no children. A hallway of photographs. William Turner in uniform. Caleb in Little League. Caleb at the academy. Caleb and Margaret on their wedding day. Caleb shaking hands with governors, judges, principals. A lifetime arranged in frames. Ruth looked away. Basement. The stairs were narrow. At the bottom, a workroom took half the space. Tools, shelving, a radio, a scarred table. At the far end, stood a wall of newer paneling that did not match anything else. Edwin handed her a key. He had a carpenter install a concealed door after his father died, 1999. The keyhole was behind a strip of removable molding. The lock turned. A section of wall swung inward. The room beyond was 12 feet deep, with metal shelving down both sides. 36 banker's boxes, each one labeled. Names, dates, case numbers. Ruth stepped inside. The air was dry and still. Clarence Morrow, Denise Harper, Alton Price, Marcus Green, Sarah Lee. People, some familiar, some she'd never heard of. Then, on the second shelf from the bottom, Isaiah Monroe, 1988. Ruth stopped breathing. Edwin stayed in the doorway. You knew? No. You ever come in here? Never. You expect me to believe Caleb Turner kept a room full of police files for 27 years and his lawyer never asked why? I asked, and he said one day they'd belong to somebody who knew what they meant. And you accepted that? No. Edwin's expression was tired. I was his lawyer, Mrs. Monroe, not his priest. She pulled the box down. It was heavier than she expected. She set it on the table and stood over it for a long moment before she lifted the lid. Newspaper clippings, copies of court filings, photographs of a tan Ford pickup taken in a department lot. Then a yellow legal pad in Caleb's handwriting, witness statements, church log, dispatch times, a map with a route traced in pencil, 9.2 miles. Best time under normal conditions, 14 minutes. In rain, 17. The robbery had come in approximately 5 minutes after Isaiah was seen at the church. Ruth kept reading, and then she found it, not the typed report, a handwritten draft, and at the bottom of the first page. Alibi appears credible. Recommend immediate verification before continued detention. She stared at the sentence until the words came apart. For 38 years she had imagined Caleb. Suspected. The truth. The paper told her he had known it well enough to write it down. Her hands began to shake. Beneath it was a carbon of a memo signed by Caleb 2 days after the arrest. Subject: Monroe alibi. He recommended re-interviewing the clerk and releasing Isaiah pending further investigation. Across the top, in a different hand, Hold WT. Ruth sat down. His father. Edwin nodded. You knew that too? I knew he blamed his father. Blamed. She stood so fast the chair scraped. He was 41 years old. I know. He wasn't a child. He put my father in handcuffs. He rewrote the report. Edwin said nothing. Do you know what 11 months did to us? No. We lost the house. My mother worked doubles. My brother quit baseball because we couldn't cover the fees. My father came home and spent 30 years watching mirrors. I know. Sorry isn't enough. Then don't say it. Edwin nodded and did not. Ruth put both hands on the table and listened to herself breathe. That was when she saw the sealed envelope under the legal pad. Ruth. She tore it open. 1 page. Edwin Shaw can explain the estate. The boxes explain me. Do not trust my memory where documents disagree with it. Do not protect my reputation. Whoops up, guys. Start with your father, then decide what the rest is worth. CT. What does he mean, the rest? Edwin looked at the shelves. I think he means the other 35. She stayed in the basement until after dark. Halfway through the box, under the trial file, she found 4 pages clipped together and dated May 1992. Not a report. Caleb had written it for himself, the way a man writes down something he cannot say out loud. I went to his shop today. I had been sitting in the lot on Pryor Street for 2 hours before I made myself do it. Ruth read it standing up. The garage door was open. He was at the bench winding wire onto a spool, and he saw me in the doorway, and he did not stop winding. Mr. Monroe. Deputy. I'm not here in any official... I know why you're here. I said I'd come to apologize. He kept winding. For which part? I said all of it. I said I'd known the times didn't work. I said I'd driven the road myself the next morning. He set the spool down then. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. You want me to make you lighter, he said. I said that wasn't it. I think I was lying. Deputy Turner, I've got a man coming at 4 to look at a panel that's been arcing behind a wall for 6 years. Owner's been painting over the scorch marks and telling himself the smell is the building settling. He picked up a rag. You know what I tell people like that? Doesn't matter how sorry you are about the scorch marks. Go to the panel. I asked him what that meant. It means the next one, he said. You're going to stop somebody next month, next year. Start there, before they lose 11 months. I said I wanted to do something for him. He said, you had 11 months to do something for me. Then he told me to get off his property, and he said it the same way he'd say the time of day. He did not raise his voice. I have thought about that more than anything else, he said. Ruth set the pages down on the table and pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes. He had come. Her father had never told her. Near 10, Edwin asked whether she wanted him to stay. No. You have the house key. I'm not taking the house. You don't have to decide tonight. I already told you. I heard you. He set a card on the table. Call if you need anything. At the bottom of the box, under everything, was a small plastic case. For Ruth Monroe. Recorded 14 June 2026. There was a cassette player on a shelf in the study. It took her 3 tries to make it work. Caleb's voice came through thin and mechanical, older than she remembered, the breathing slightly labored. Ruth Monroe, if Edwin is following instructions, you're hearing this after I'm dead. That's deliberate, and it's cowardly. She stood over the machine with her arms crossed. Your father asked me a question the night I arrested him. He asked whether the evidence would have been enough if the man in that cell had been my father. The tape hissed. The answer was yes. It was enough that night. It was enough before he was booked. It was enough when Reverend Daniels called, and Mrs. Crawford, and Harold Bell, and it was more than enough the next morning after I drove the route myself. Ruth sat down slowly. My father told me to take a sentence out of my report, and I took it out. I was 41. I had a wife and a mortgage and 13 years in the department, and I knew what he could do to my career, and I was afraid to find out whether he would. A long pause. No excuse arrived after it. I'm not leaving you 36 examples of my virtue. Don't make that mistake. I'm leaving you 36 examples of how long it took me to understand that fairness is not something a department gets to claim because good people work there. The tape clicked. If you burn every page in that room, I won't be here to object. If you publish all of it, I won't be here to defend myself. That's the point. His voice thinned. Your father never needed my forgiveness. I needed his, and I never earned the right to ask. A breath. I'm sorry, Ruth. I'm sorry I helped take 11 months from your father. The recording ended. She sat in the chair until after midnight, and what surprised her was that she did not feel better. For years, she had imagined an admission would move something, that if Caleb Turner finally said it plainly, some locked room inside her would open. Instead, the truth arrived and sat down beside the pain. It did not replace it. At 1 in the morning, she went back downstairs and opened another box. Clarence Morrow, 1991, 22 years old, stopped on suspicion of a false registration. The paperwork showed Caleb had verified it and released him. No harm done. Then, in Caleb's hand at the bottom, I nearly made the same mistake. The difference was not better instincts. The difference was memory of Monroe. Denise Harper, 1994. A schoolteacher stopped 3 times in 2 months after buying a used Cadillac. No citations. Caleb had reviewed the stops after she complained and disciplined 1 deputy informally. Not enough. I treated each stop separately because looking at them together required a conclusion I did not want. Marcus Green, 2001. Searched after a traffic stop, nothing found, complaint dismissed. Caleb reopened it internally and found the deputy had searched 7 black motorists and 1 white motorist that quarter. Patterns are invisible if you insist on examining 1 dot at a time. Ruth sat back on her heels in the cold little room. The boxes were not absolution. They were the record of a man changing slowly, painfully, and late. That was harder to hate. At 2:30, she called her brother. James picked up on the 4th ring. Somebody better be dead. He is. Silence. Who? Caleb Turner. Another silence. Okay. He left me his house. James said nothing for so long she checked the screen. I'm sorry. What? I'm sitting in it. James, there are files here. Daddy's. The real ones. He understood faster than she expected. He knew. Yes. James whispered something she didn't catch. What? I said I knew it. You were 12. I knew he knew. Because Daddy! Knew. A pause. Ruth. Turner came to the shop. 92. Now it was James who went quiet. How do you know that? He wrote it down. She looked at the 4 clipped pages on the table. James, why didn't you ever tell me? Because Daddy told me not to. He said you were already building your whole career on this. He didn't want to hand you gasoline. Ruth closed her eyes. Does Mama know? About tonight? No. You going to tell her? I don't know. What are you going to do with the house? I don't want it. That's not what I asked. The next morning, she drove to Savannah. Nadine Monroe was watering 2 potted ferns outside her apartment when Ruth pulled in. She looked up. You look terrible. Good morning to you, too. You drove 3 hours without calling. Something happened. Ruth took the watering can out of her hand. Come inside. She told her mother everything, in order, starting with the death and ending with the sentence. When she read it aloud, Nadine's face changed. Read it again. Alibi appears credible. Recommend immediate verification before continued detention. Nadine sat very still. So he knew. Yes. Your daddy always said he did. I thought Daddy meant he. Should. Have known. No. Nadine shook her head slowly. He meant knew. Ruth stared at her. You knew? Not that there was paper. Why didn't you ever tell me? What would it have changed? Everything. No. Her mother's voice was gentle. It would have changed what you were angry about. That's not the same as changing what happened. Ruth got up and stood at the window. He changed the report. His father told him to. He recorded a confession. He apologized. Nadine said nothing. Mama, what do you want me to say? I don't know. Nadine looked down at her hands. Your father wanted that apology for about 10 years. Then what? Then he got tired of giving Caleb Turner that much say over his own piece. She smoothed the tablecloth flat. You knew your daddy's daytime anger. I knew the 2 in the morning kind. The kind where a patrol car goes past the house and he sits at the kitchen table till 4. The kind where he'd get dressed for a job and then change shirts because Gray put him back on that road. Ruth swallowed. I didn't know that. He didn't want you to. Nadine reached across. But he got better. Did he forgive him? No. The answer came fast. Then she softened. But forgiveness isn't the only way people put a thing down. Within a week, Ruth brought in help. Not reporters and not politicians. 2 archivists, a retired judge named Aurelia Baptiste, 3 lawyers who owed her favors, and 2 investigators from the state's Conviction Review Office. She set one rule, and she set it on the first morning, standing in Caleb Turner's kitchen with a legal pad. No conclusion without documents. His guilt about 1988 is not evidence about anything else in that room. If a file doesn't support a finding, we say so out loud and we move on. One of the young lawyers said, even if it's the file we want. Especially then. The work was slower and less satisfying than any of them expected. Some cases had been handled correctly and kept only because they had taught Caleb something. Others were worse than Ruth had prepared herself for. A man had spent 4 months in jail on a misidentification before a fingerprint cleared him. A woman had temporarily lost custody of her child after an arrest that was never supported. 2 brothers had been searched 11 times in 3 years on anonymous complaints that never once produced anything. In some files, race sat at the center of the page. In others, poverty. In others, nothing you could put a name to with a straight face. That distinction mattered to Ruth more than it mattered to anyone else on the team. She did not want a morality play. She wanted the record. The record was harder. Then, in the 3rd month, a reporter got wind of the basement. Within 48 hours, there were camera trucks on Waverly Road. The headline was exactly what she'd expected. Dead Deputies' Secret Archive may expose decades of bias. Ruth hated it, not because it was entirely wrong, but because it was too clean. Inside a week, Caleb Turner had become a villain to people who knew one sentence about him, and then a hero to people who'd learned he kept the files. Neither version was true, and both were easier than the boxes. 9 days after the story broke, the county attorney filed. His name was Roy Kessler, and the motion was 11 pages. It argued that a substantial portion of the material in the Turner basement consisted of official records of the Bellwether County Sheriff's Department, originals, carbons, and internal memoranda, that had been removed from the department without authorization and held in private hands for 27 years. It asked that the entire collection be surrendered to the county, sealed, and reviewed administratively before any further disclosure. Kessler was not entirely wrong either. That was the trouble. Some of it is theirs, the retired judge said, reading over her glasses. He copied plenty after retirement through open records, and the legal pads are his own. But that hold memo with his father's initials, that's a departmental original. He walked out of that building with it in his jacket. So they take it back and it goes in a basement again, Ruth said. A different basement. Probably. And every family we've contacted gets a letter saying the review is suspended pending administrative process. Probably that too. Ruth stood at the window a long time. Then we oppose it. Her lead associate cleared his throat. Ruth, we may not have standing. She turned around. Edwin Shaw came out that afternoon and sat down across from her at Caleb's kitchen table with the will in his folder, and he did not look happy. You filed nothing. The estate is unsettled. As of this moment, you are a named beneficiary who has publicly and repeatedly announced her intention to disclaim. He turned the page toward her. And there's a contingent bequest. Ruth read it twice. To the county. To the county. To Bellwether County. If you disclaim, the house, the land, and the contents pass to the county as a gift for public purposes. Edwin closed the folder. Which resolves Mr. Kessler's motion without a hearing. They wouldn't have to seize the boxes. They'd simply own them. Ruth sat back. He rigged it. He wrote that clause himself. I advised against it, in writing, twice. Why? I told him it was manipulative. What did he say? Edwin looked away for the first time since she'd met him. He said he'd spent 30 years being easy to walk away from, and he'd like to be expensive once. Ruth laughed, one hard, unamused sound, and put a hand over her mouth. So the deal is I take his house. The deal is, you take his house. She was alone in it that night. The team had gone back to Atlanta. The camera trucks had moved to a fire in the next county. The plaster in the front room was half stripped, and the whole place smelled like a 100-year-old building with its skin off. Ruth walked the rooms with the lights off. She had spent 38 years learning to be the kind of person who was not moved by these people. She had said no on the phone in her own kitchen, with her hand flat on the counter, and she had meant it, and she had believed that meaning it was the same as being right. Now she stood in the hallway where the photographs had hung and understood that Caleb Turner had built the last trap of his life out of the one material she had never learned to refuse. He had made her choose between her father's name and her father's work. She stopped at the head of the basement stairs. Do not spend your whole life trying to make one old deputy admit something you already know. And go to the panel. And the next one, before they lose 11 months. Ruth stood in the dark and hated, with a clarity that felt almost like grief, that the dead man had understood her father better at 79 than she had wanted him to. She called Edwin at 6 the next morning. File the acceptance. A pause on the line. You're certain? No. She was looking out the kitchen window at the Two Oaks. File it anyway. She told James that afternoon. He was quiet for a while. You accepted Caleb Turner's house. Yes. Daddy's going to come back and haunt me for letting you. He'll have to get in line. She told her mother in person, because there was no version of that conversation she was willing to have over a phone. Nadine listened all the way to the end without interrupting, which was itself alarming. So it's yours, Nadine said finally. It's mine. Her mother looked around her small apartment, at the ferns, at the wall of framed grandchildren. Your daddy would hate that house. I know. He'd hate that man leaving it to you. I know. He would also hate you walking away from something that might get somebody home. Nadine folded her hands. Because you were too angry to touch the walls. Ruth looked at her. That sounds like him. I was married to the man 48 years. Some of it rubbed off. The hearing on Kessler's motion was set for a Tuesday in February. 6 days before it, Edwin called. I found something. In a safe deposit box, released on Mr. Turner's death. A pause. It isn't from Caleb. The letter was 4 pages in a large, shaky hand, dated January 1999, 7 months before William Turner died. Caleb. You have spent 10 years punishing me without once saying that is what you are doing. Ruth stopped and looked up. Edwin nodded at the page. William admitted ordering his son to strike the language about Isaiah's alibi. For 2 pages he defended it. The county had been frightened. The evidence had looked stronger that night than it did later. Releasing the man would have looked reckless. Then the letter turned. I told myself I was protecting the department from embarrassment, until embarrassment became more important to me than a man's freedom. And below that, you were right to want him released. I was wrong to stop you. You were also wrong to let me. Ruth read that last line 3 times. For 38 years she had pictured William Turner as the simple villain of the story, and now the dead had refused her even that convenience. At the bottom of the 4th page, if you ever speak to Mr. Monroe, do not tell him your father made you do it. You were 41 years old. I was your sheriff, and I was your father. Neither one of those took your judgment away from you. She set the letter down. Everyone had arrived late. Isaiah had been on time. Judge Harlan Voss took 2 hours and ruled from the bench. The departmental originals, some 90 documents across 11 boxes, would be transferred to the State Conviction Review Office rather than to the county, under a chain of custody order, with certified copies retained on the property and available to affected families and their counsel. Everything Caleb had written himself, and everything obtained through public records after his retirement, remained the property of the estate, Nothing would be sealed. Kessler got his originals out of a private basement. He did not get them back into his own. It was a partial win. Ruth had stopped expecting the other kind. By spring, the state had opened formal review in 9 cases and administrative findings in 4 more. Nobody promised an overturned conviction. Nobody promised money. Nobody promised anybody redemption. Ruth liked that. Promises had already done enough damage in Bellwether County. At the press conference on the courthouse steps, somebody asked the question she had known was coming since October. "Mrs. Monroe, do you believe Caleb Turner was a racist?" She looked at the man. Behind him, cameras, microphones, 40 people who wanted a word small enough to carry home. She thought about her father. She thought about Caleb at 41 holding a piece of paper, and Caleb at 79 talking into a cassette recorder in an empty house. I think a label can end a conversation before the facts have finished speaking. The steps went quiet. Mr. Turner made a decision in 1988 that treated my father's freedom as less important than his own security and his father's authority. Race was part of the world that decision was made in. So was fear, so was ambition, so was family. She let that sit. None of it excuses him. Do you forgive him? Ruth almost smiled. People loved that question. It made a complicated story feel finished. No, not on my father's behalf. I don't have that authority. Do you forgive him personally? I don't know. That answer unsettled them more than the first one had. But forgiveness isn't the purpose of these files. Accuracy is. The courthouse clock started behind her. My father was innocent before Caleb Turner admitted it. He was innocent before another man confessed. He was innocent before the charges were dismissed. He was innocent on the side of that road. She waited out the bell. The truth didn't make him innocent. The truth only arrived late. The Isaiah Monroe Justice Archive opened in the old Turner House in October 2027, 1 year almost to the day after a lawyer had called Ruth's Kitchen in Atlanta. She refused to let it become a museum of outrage. No reenactments, no wall-sized photograph of handcuffs, no exhibit titled Villains. The front room held a timeline, and the timeline was the whole exhibit. 7:42 p.m., robbery reported. 8:06, Isaiah Monroe stopped. 8:27, first corroborating witness calls the department. 8:31, second. 8:34, third. 9:26, detention continued. 11 months later, charges dismissed. Beside it, under glass, the handwritten draft. Alibi appears credible. That was enough. The next room showed how an assumption enters a report, becomes paperwork, hardens into an official account, and survives, because each person in the line trusts the person before them. Upstairs, the boxes sat in climate-controlled storage. Researchers could request access. Families could get help pulling their own records. Law students volunteered on Saturdays. 2 retired officers taught document review. The public defender's office ran workshops in what had been the dining room. Nearly 300 people came on opening day. Nadine sat in the front row. James stood behind her chair. Edwin Shaw stayed near the back with his hands folded. Ruth kept her remarks short. She thanked the people who had done the reviewing, and then she looked at her mother. "Mama, anything you'd like to say?" Nadine shook her head. That is the most surprising thing that has happened all year. People laughed. Nadine pointed a finger at her. Don't ruin it. More laughter. And then an elderly man in the second row stood up, and it took Ruth a moment to place him. Clarence Morrow, 58 now, gray at the temples, holding a folded piece of paper. I didn't know I was in one of those boxes until your office called me. Ruth nodded. Deputy Turner stopped me 36 years ago. Thought my registration was fake. He looked around the room. I stayed mad about it a long time. He unfolded the paper. This is a copy of what he wrote down that night. Ruth knew the line before he read it. The difference was not better instincts. The difference was memory of Monroe. Clarence turned toward the front row. Mrs. Monroe, I never met your husband. Nadine's eyes filled. But it looks like something he said in a jail cell is part of why I got home that night. The room went entirely quiet. So I thought somebody ought to come say thank you. Nadine put a hand over her mouth. Ruth looked at the floor and let it pass through her. It did not make the 11 months worth anything. It only meant the damage had traveled farther than the people who caused it ever bothered to find out. Afterward, Ruth found Edwin alone in what had been Caleb's study. You all right? Yes. You look like a man regretting a career in estate law. I regret a great many things. Estate law is only some of them. He glanced toward the hallway. He would have liked this. Don't. I'm sorry. No. She shook her head. Don't tell me what Caleb would have liked. This isn't his reward. Edwin nodded slowly. You're right. Ruth looked around the room. The empty picture hooks, the new shelving, the boxes of A Stranger's Life gone out to the County Historical Society. He left the evidence. Yes, that matters. Yes. He told the truth. Eventually, that matters too. She sighed. I'm still learning how to let two things be true at once. That may be the only useful thing age teaches. You're not that old. I'm 71. You're ancient. Thank you. They laughed quietly, in a house where neither of them had ever expected to laugh. Late in the afternoon, after the last car had gone, Ruth went upstairs alone. Sunlight came in long through the tall windows. She carried her father's box into the reading room and took out the one document she had not put on display. A yellow invoice sheet. Monroe Electrical Service. September 21st, 1988. Work completed. Education Wing Lighting Circuit. Signed, Samuel Daniels. And at the bottom, in Isaiah's own hand, returned 7:35 p.m. for invoice book. Ruth touched the paper with 2 fingers. So small, so ordinary. This piece of paper had existed before the arrest, before the jail, before the lawyers and the hearings and the confession, and the 38 years spent arguing about what people knew and when they knew it. Her father had been innocent while it sat in a church office drawer. The paperwork never created that. It only failed to honor it. She carried it downstairs. In the front hall hung a single bronze plaque. Some county officials had wanted Caleb Turner's name on it. Ruth refused. Others wanted a sentence condemning him. She refused that too. The plaque carried 6 words. Truth delayed is still a debt. And beneath them, the Isaiah Monroe Justice Archive. Ruth stood under her father's name and finally understood the thing he had been trying to teach her from a hospital bed. He had been the man who teased her about Kevin Parker's leaking Chevrolet, the electrician who kept peppermints in his toolbox, the husband who brought Nadine coffee every Sunday morning, the father who hated algebra and always somehow spotted the wrong answer, the grandfather who let children hold the flashlight while he repaired things that did not need repairing. 11 months had happened to him. They had not become him. Through the open front door, she could see the 2 old oaks moving in a light autumn wind. A car pulled into the gravel. A young woman got out holding a file folder against her chest and stood beside her open door as though she might still change her mind. Ruth stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated. "My father told me this place helps people find old case records." "We try. He was arrested in 2004. She looked down at the folder. "He says the report isn't what happened." 39 years earlier, a 16-year-old girl had stood in a sheriff's office wondering why nobody would listen to her father. Ruth opened the door wider. "Come inside." She held it until the woman was all the way in.